Why is my Excel macro not available in the current workbook? Have you ever encountered a scenario where an Excel macro that works flawlessly in a new workbook is mysteriously absent from another? This can be quite frustrating, especially if you're relying heavily on that macro for automation and efficiency. Below are some common explanations and solutions to help you resolve this issue. Potential reasons and solutions. 1. Macro security settings. One of the most common reasons for a macro not being available is due to Excel's macro security settings. Depending on your version of Excel, the default settings may disable macros to protect you from potentially harmful code. Solution. Go to File Options, Trust Center Settings, Macro Settings, and make sure that macros are enabled. If necessary, you can enable all macros, but be cautious as this may expose you to security risks. 2. Location of the macro. Macros can be stored in different locations, and their scope can affect availability. This workbook, if your macro is stored in this workbook, it will only be available in that specific workbook. Personal Macro Workbook. Macros saved in the Personal Macro Workbook are available globally across all Excel sessions. Solution. If you need the macro to be accessible across multiple workbooks, consider saving it in the Personal Macro Workbook. You can do this by recording a new macro and, in the Store Macro In dropdown, selecting Personal Macro Workbook. 3. Workbook type. Another possible cause is the type of workbook you are using. .xlsm, macro-enabled workbook. This file type supports macros. .xlsx, this file type does not support macros. Solution. Ensure that your workbook is saved as in .xlsm file. To do this, go to File, Save As, and select Excel Macro-Enabled Workbook as the file type. 4. Code errors. Sometimes, there may be an error in the macro code itself that prevents it from running in a particular workbook. Solution. Open the Visual Basic for Applications (VBA) editor by pressing Alt plus F11 and check the code for errors. You can test individual parts of the code to isolate any issues and debug appropriately. 5. Protection settings. If the workbook or specific sheets are protected, this might restrict the use of macros. Solution. Check if your workbook or certain sheets are protected by navigating to Review Unprotect Workbook or Unprotect Sheet. You may need a password if protection settings are enabled. Conclusion. Understanding why a macro may not be available in the current workbook despite working in a new one involves checking several factors. These include security settings, the location where the macro is stored, the workbook type, potential code errors, and protection settings. Ensuring that you configure these correctly should help you resolve the issue and gain the full benefits of using macros in Excel.